My cheating wife chose a coffee shop flirt, plotted to destroy me. But I had a plan just for her. Some things. Only when everything falls apart do you realize how long you've been living in an illusion. My name is David, I'm 30 years old, and I used to work in retail before unemployment knocked me down. But that wasn't the hardest fall I'd take that year. I thought I had it all figured out. Married to Fiona, a beautiful 23-year-old who worked at this cozy coffee shop downtown. Everyone who met her thought she was perfect. The way she smiled, how she'd listen to your problems like they were the most important thing in the world, how she made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I was completely, utterly devoted to her. 7 years between us felt like nothing when she looked at me like I hung the moon. Our little apartment wasn't much, but it was ours. She'd make coffee in the morning. Better than anything they served at her shop, she'd say with that laugh of hers. I'd watch her move around the kitchen in my old t-shirt, humming some song she'd heard on the radio, and think, this is it. This is what happiness looks like. We'd talk about everything and nothing, make plans for the future, dream about the house we'd buy someday when my job situation improved. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel magical. Movie nights on our worn-out couch, grocery shopping together on Sundays, even doing laundry became an adventure when Fiona was around. She'd fold my shirts with such care, like each crease mattered. Taking care of you is taking care of us, she'd say, and I believed every word. The pandemic hit, and her coffee shop closed down. I watched her handle it with such grace, never complaining, always optimistic about finding something new. We'll get through this together, she'd whisper when I worried about money, about the future, about everything falling apart around us. She was my anchor in the storm, my reason to keep fighting when everything else seemed hopeless. But storms don't always come from outside. Sometimes they brew in the place you feel safest, behind the smile of the person you trust most. It started small, the kind of changes you notice but convince yourself don't mean anything. Fiona began spending more time on her phone, scrolling through social media with this distant look in her eyes. When I'd ask what was so interesting, she'd snap it shut and say, nothing important, just catching up with old friends. The conversations we used to have over dinner became shorter, punctuated by the buzz of notifications she'd check even while I was talking. She'd developed new habits that seemed innocent enough. Late-night showers that used to be quick became hour-long affairs. She started wearing makeup more often, even when we weren't going anywhere special. I just want to feel good about myself, she'd explain when I complimented her on looking extra beautiful. And she did look beautiful. Radiant, even. I thought I was lucky to have a wife who took such good care of herself. The lies started small, too. She'd say she was going to the grocery store and come back 3 hours later with barely anything in the bags. I ran into Sarah from work, we got coffee and lost track of time, she'd explain. But her stories never quite added up. Sarah from the coffee shop that had been closed for months? The details would shift each time she told them, but I wanted to believe her so badly that I made excuses for the inconsistencies. Then came the phone calls she'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed tones. When I'd walk in, she'd quickly say goodbye and tell me it was her sister, or her mom, or some friend with drama. But her voice carried a different energy during those calls. Lighter, more animated, more alive than she'd been with me in weeks. The distance between us grew like a canyon, opening up in slow motion. She'd go to bed earlier, wake up later, always seemed to be just out of reach even when we were in the same room. When I'd try to initiate intimacy, she'd have a headache, or be too tired, or need to get up early. I'm just stressed about everything, she'd say, and I'd hold her and promise things would get better, never realizing I was the problem she was trying to solve one evening, while she was in one of her marathon showers. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a WhatsApp notification from someone named G, just the letter G. The preview showed enough to make my blood run cold. Can't wait to see you again. I stared at that screen until it went dark, my hands shaking, my mind racing through every possible innocent explanation. But deep down I already knew. That night I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me, this woman I thought I knew completely, and realized I might not know her at all. The Fiona who used to curl into my arms was now carefully maintaining distance even in sleep. The woman who used to share everything with me was guarding secrets that were apparently more important than our marriage. I started paying attention differently after that. Not the loving attention of a devoted husband, but the careful observation of someone who's beginning to suspect they've been played for a fool. And what I discovered made me sick to my stomach. During one of her errands, I checked the browser history on our shared laptop. Most of it was innocent, online shopping, news articles, the usual random searches. But buried in there were searches that made my heart sink. How to know if you're falling out of love, signs your marriage is over, how to start fresh after divorce. She'd been researching our ending while I'd been planning our future. The WhatsApp messages were the smoking gun I'd been dreading to find. She'd gotten careless, leaving the app open on our tablet one afternoon. Gabriel, that was his full name. I recognized him from the photos she'd shown me months ago, back when she still worked at the coffee shop. He's just a regular customer, she'd said then. Nice guy, good tipper. Nice guy, good tipper, and apparently good enough to replace her husband. The messages went back months. It started innocent enough. Him asking how she was handling the shop closure, offering support during tough times. But it evolved into something that made me feel physically ill. Pet names, inside jokes, discussions about meeting up, and worst of all, conversations about me, about us, about how unhappy she was, how I didn't understand her, how I was holding her back from being her true self. She'd painted me as this controlling, emotionally distant husband who didn't appreciate her. She told him I was jealous of her friendships, paranoid about her activities, impossible to live with. She'd taken every private moment of vulnerability I'd shared with her, my fears about unemployment, my insecurities about not being able to provide better for us, my struggles with depression, and twisted them into evidence of what a terrible partner I was. But the most devastating part wasn't the lies she told about me. It was reading how alive she sounded talking to him, how excited and engaged and genuinely happy. She used words and expressed feelings that she hadn't shared with me in months. It was like reading about a completely different person. The person she apparently became when she wasn't pretending to be my wife. The timeline was brutal. While I'd been losing sleep worrying about our finances, she'd been texting Gabriel about expensive restaurants she wanted to try. While I'd been applying for jobs and getting rejected, she'd been complaining to him about how boring her life with me had become. While I'd been planning small surprises to cheer her up during the lockdown, she'd been planning how to transition from emotional cheating to something more. They'd met in person at least 3 times that I could confirm from the messages. Coffee dates that coincided with her mysterious errands, long walks in the park when she'd claimed to be job hunting. Even a lunch date on the day she'd told me she was visiting her sister. Each meeting had pushed their relationship further from friendship into territory that belonged to us, to our marriage, to the life we'd built together. The most recent messages revealed the scope of her deception. She wasn't just cheating, she was strategically building a case against me. Screenshots of arguments we'd had, taken out of context. Voice recordings of me sounding frustrated or tired, presented as evidence of my emotional abuse. She was documenting everything, creating a narrative where she was the victim of a bad marriage instead of the architect of its destruction. Gabriel ate it up. He played the role of the understanding friend, the shoulder to cry on, the man who would treat her right. You deserve so much better, he'd tell her. I can't believe he makes you feel this way. He was either completely naive about what she was doing, or he was a willing participant in the destruction of my marriage. Either way, he'd become the solution to her problem, and I was the problem. The worst part was reading how she planned to end things with me. Not with honesty, not with the respect you'd show someone you'd promised to love forever, but with a carefully orchestrated campaign to make me look like the villain. She wanted to leave the marriage looking like the wronged party, the woman who'd tried everything to make it work but finally had to escape an impossible situation. She'd been laying groundwork for weeks, telling her friends and family selective stories about our fights, leaving out her role in creating the tension, making it seem like I was becoming increasingly difficult to live with, more controlling, more demanding. She was rewriting our history in real time, turning herself into the protagonist of a story where I was clearly the antagonist. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. All those nights she thought I was sleeping. I was lying there, thinking, planning, preparing. I started documenting everything, taking screenshots of her messages before she could delete them, keeping records of her lies, tracking the times she claimed to be one place while her phone's location showed her somewhere else entirely. If she wanted to play games with the truth, I was going to make sure I had all the facts. I became a detective in my own home. I learned her patterns, her passwords, her habits. I knew when she'd be in the shower long enough for me to check her phone. I knew which stories she'd told to which people, and how they contradicted each other. I knew about the email account she'd created just for communicating with Gabriel, the one she thought I'd never find. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence. It was pretending everything was normal. Kissing her goodbye in the morning, knowing she'd probably see Gabriel that day. Making dinner for someone who was planning to leave me. Listening to her complain about her day while knowing she'd been texting another man throughout it. Every interaction became a performance, and I was getting better at it than she was. I gave her chances to come clean, subtle opportunities to tell me the truth, to confess, to try to save what was left of us. You seem distant lately, I'd say. Is everything okay between us? She'd look me right in the eye and lie. Everything's fine, baby. I love you. The words felt like poison coming from her mouth. 3 weeks of this secret knowledge nearly broke me. Seeing her laugh at Gabriel's texts while sitting next to me on the couch, watching her get dressed up for their dates while telling me she was running errands, listening to her practice lies in the mirror, perfecting her innocent expressions. I was living with a stranger who wore my wife's face. The final straw came when I found the letter she'd drafted but never sent, a message to Gabriel talking about their future together. She'd written about the life they could have, the trips they'd take, how much happier she'd be once she was free from me. She'd planned out our divorce like a business transaction, calculating what she could take, what she could claim, how she could maximize her position while minimizing her guilt. That's when I realized she wasn't just cheating on me, she was trying to destroy me. This wasn't a woman who'd fallen out of love and made a mistake. This was someone who'd made a calculated decision to replace me while making sure I took the blame for our marriage failing. She wanted her freedom and her reputation intact, and she was willing to sacrifice my mental health, my relationships, and my future to get both. But I'd learned something about myself during those 3 weeks of secret investigation. I was stronger than she thought, smarter than she'd given me credit for, and I was done being the victim in her story. The morning I made my decision, Fiona was in the shower getting ready for another errands day that would undoubtedly include seeing Gabriel. I packed a single bag with essentials, gathered all the evidence I'd collected, and made 3 phone calls. One to a divorce lawyer, one to my brother asking if I could stay with him for a while, and one to my boss at the temp agency about any available work. When she came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, humming that same tune she'd hummed on so many happier mornings, I was sitting on the bed with her phone in my hands. "We need to talk," I said. The color drained from her face. "David, I can explain—" "No," I interrupted, "you can't. Not anymore." I showed her the screenshots, the messages, the timeline I'd constructed of her deception. I watched her go through the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, tears. She tried every manipulation in her playbook. I was invading her privacy. I was being controlling. She was confused. She needed space. She never meant for it to go this far. The Fiona I married wouldn't have done this, I told her. So I'm not staying married to whoever you've become. She begged. She pleaded. She promised to cut contact with Gabriel immediately. She swore it was just emotional, that nothing physical had happened, that she loved me and wanted to work things out. But I'd read her messages. I knew her real feelings. I'd seen her practicing these exact words, these exact expressions, in case she ever got caught. "You don't get to rewrite this story anymore," I said. "I know who you really are now." I left that morning with my bag, my evidence, and our dog, the one thing in that apartment that had never lied to me. Fiona stood in the doorway crying, calling after me, asking me not to give up on us. But there was no us anymore. There hadn't been for months. The divorce paperwork was filed that afternoon. Clean, simple, no fault. I didn't want her money, didn't want to fight over our few possessions, didn't want to drag this out longer than necessary. I just wanted out, and I wanted it official. My brother's couch became my base of operations for rebuilding my life. I found work within a week, nothing glamorous but honest work that paid enough to cover my basic needs. I started sleeping better than I had in months, no longer lying awake wondering what secrets the person next to me was keeping. Fiona tried to contact me dozens of times in those first few weeks. Texts, calls, emails, messages through mutual friends. She wanted closure, she said. She wanted to explain her side. She wanted another chance to make things right. But I'd already heard her side, in her messages to Gabriel, in her conversations with friends, in the letter she'd written about our future. I didn't need to hear the sanitized version she'd prepared for me. The funny thing about truth is that it has a way of coming out, even when people try to bury it. Fiona's carefully constructed narrative about our marriage began to fall apart when people started asking questions. Why had I left so suddenly? Why wasn't I fighting for the relationship? Why did I seem so calm about the whole thing? Some of our mutual friends reached out to me directly, and I told them the truth. Not the ugly details, not the personal betrayals, just the simple facts. She'd been emotionally involved with someone else for months, had been planning to leave, and had been setting me up to take the blame for our marriage failing. I had evidence, I said, but I wasn't interested in destroying her reputation. I just wanted people to know that there were 2 sides to every story. Word got around. It always does in situations like this. Gabriel apparently didn't take the news of her deception very well. Turned out he wasn't as interested in a relationship with someone who'd been manipulating multiple people simultaneously. Fiona found herself facing the consequences of her choices without the safety net she'd thought she was building. She lost Gabriel. She lost the moral high ground she'd been claiming. She lost the support of friends who realized they'd been lied to. And she lost me. Not as a casualty of a failed marriage, but as a direct result of her own actions. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied watching her world crumble. I just felt free. Free from the lies, free from the manipulation, free from pretending that someone who was actively working against me actually loved me. The temp job turned into something more permanent. I found a small apartment that was mine alone, decorated it the way I wanted, filled it with things that made me happy. I started exercising again, reading again, reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with while I was focused on fixing a marriage that was already over. My dog adapted to our new life beautifully. No more tension in the house, no more hushed phone conversations, no more walking on eggshells around someone's secret emotional life. Just quiet mornings, peaceful evenings, and the simple satisfaction of living honestly. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that Fiona had tried to reconnect with Gabriel. But he wasn't interested in someone he couldn't trust. She'd moved back in with her parents, was working at a different coffee shop, and was apparently telling people that I'd abandoned her during a difficult time in her life. The same story, different audience, same lies. But the truth has a way of following people around. Those who knew us both, who had seen how devoted I'd been and how suddenly everything changed, drew their own conclusions. Her version of events didn't hold up under scrutiny, especially when people started comparing notes about what she'd told them. I didn't need vindication from other people, though. I had something better, peace of mind. I knew what had really happened. I knew I'd been a faithful, loving husband who'd been systematically betrayed by someone I'd trusted completely. I knew I'd handled the discovery with dignity and strength. Even when everything in me wanted to lash out and hurt her the way she'd hurt me, the person I'd been during our marriage, anxious, insecure, constantly trying to fix problems I hadn't created, that person was gone. In his place was someone who knew his own worth, who wouldn't accept being lied to or manipulated, who understood that love without honesty isn't love at all. I learned to trust my instincts again. When something felt wrong, I investigated instead of making excuses. When someone's words didn't match their actions, I paid attention to the actions. When people showed me who they really were, I believed them the first time. The hardest part of recovery wasn't the loneliness or the practical challenges of starting over. It was learning to distinguish between healthy skepticism and paranoid distrust. Not everyone was Fiona, I had to remind myself. Not every relationship was a performance. Not every person was secretly working against me. But I also learned that some people were exactly like Fiona. Charming on the surface, manipulative underneath, willing to sacrifice others for their own comfort. The experience had given me a radar for detecting those people, and more importantly, the strength to walk away from them before they could cause damage. A year after I'd walked out of that apartment, I ran into Fiona at the grocery store. She looked different, thinner, more tired, less confident. She approached me carefully, like someone approaching a wild animal. "David," she said, "how are you?" "I'm well," I replied, and meant it. She asked if we could talk, if I'd be willing to have coffee with her, if there was any chance we could find closure together. I looked at this woman who had once been the center of my world, who had taken my love and twisted it into something ugly, who had nearly convinced me that I was the problem in our relationship. "I have all the closure I need," I told her. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." I walked away feeling nothing but relief. No anger, no sadness, no lingering attachment to what we'd once had. She was a chapter in my story, not the whole book, and I'd already moved on to better chapters. That night, I sat in my apartment with my dog at my feet, working on a freelance project that was challenging and interesting, planning a weekend hiking trip with friends I'd reconnected with. My life was smaller than it had been when I was married, but it was entirely mine. Every relationship was genuine, every conversation was honest, every day was built on truth instead of lies. I thought about the man I'd been when I first discovered those WhatsApp messages. Devastated, confused, desperate to save something that was already dead. That man had been afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid of facing the truth about someone he loved. This man, the one I'd become, wasn't afraid of any of those things. The betrayal had nearly broken me, but surviving it had made me stronger than I'd ever been. I'd learned that I could trust my judgment, handle difficult truths, and rebuild my life from scratch when necessary. I'd learned that being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who was lying to me every single day. Most importantly, I'd learned that I deserved better. Better than someone who would manipulate my emotions for their own gain. Better than someone who would rewrite our history to serve their narrative. Better than someone who would plan my destruction while pretending to love me. I used to think I knew everything about love, until one small detail turned everything upside down. But that small detail, that WhatsApp notification that started it all, had ultimately set me free. Free from illusion, free from manipulation, free from settling for less than I deserved. I was once the victim of a woman who tried to destroy my life through calculated deception and emotional manipulation. Today, I'm a man who survived that destruction and built something better from the ashes. I don't lose sleep over what happened anymore. I sleep peacefully, knowing that the person next to me, even if that person is just my dog, is loyal, honest, and genuinely cares about my well-being. Some people aren't meant to be in your life forever. Some people come into your world to teach you lessons about strength, about truth, about your own worth. Fiona taught me all of those things, just not in the way she intended. For that education, as painful as it was, I'm almost grateful. The storm that nearly destroyed me had passed, and I was still standing, scarred but stronger, wiser but not bitter, alone but not lonely. I'd learned the difference between being loved and being manipulated, between partnership and performance, between a relationship and a long con. And in learning those differences, I'd found something I'd never had before: complete peace with who I was and what I deserved. That peace was worth more than any marriage built on lies, any love that came with conditions, any future that required me to pretend the past hadn't happened. I was free, and freedom, I discovered, was the most honest love of all.